Imagine sitting quietly in a room while the person you trust most suddenly tells you that someone in your family had spoken to him privately about your future. Imagine hearing that the person who made that request was your grandfather, the one person you believed had kept certain feelings hidden for years. And then imagine discovering that the message was not about fame, money, success, or anything material, but about the person you would choose to stand beside when life became difficult. That was the emotional turning point in this story. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and stay until the very end, because the final words Zhang Linghe reveals are the words Tion Shiwi never expected to hear. The evening had started peacefully. There was nothing about the atmosphere that suggested something extraordinary was about to happen. The house was quiet, the lights were warm, and the sound of conversation from another room slowly disappeared as everyone settled down for the night. Tion Shiwi had been smiling earlier. She had spent part of the evening talking with her grandfather, listening to stories from his younger years and laughing at some of the memories he decided to share. To her, it was an ordinary family evening. But there was one thing she did not know. Earlier that same day, her grandfather had privately spoken with Zhang Linghe. And what he told him was something Zhang Linghe had promised not to reveal immediately. The conversation had happened away from everyone else. There were no cameras. There were no friends around. There was no audience. Only two people sitting across from each other, with one generation looking carefully at another. At first, Zhang Linghe believed the conversation would be simple. He thought perhaps the grandfather wanted to talk about Tian Xiwei, her career, her happiness, or the challenges that came with living under public attention. But the grandfather did not begin with any of those things. Instead, he looked directly at Zhang Linghe and remained silent for several seconds. That silence made Zhang Linghe uncomfortable. He could tell that something important was coming. Finally, the grandfather spoke. He told Zhang Linghe that people often believed love was about the happiest moments. He said people celebrated photographs, beautiful promises, public appearances, and moments when everything seemed perfect. But he believed real love was revealed when everything stopped being perfect. Those words immediately changed the mood. Zhang Linghe listened carefully. The grandfather continued. He said that Tion Shiwi had spent much of her life trying to make other people happy. She could smile even when she was tired. She could tell people she was fine when she was carrying worries inside. She could laugh in front of others while quietly thinking about things she did not know how to explain. And that was when the grandfather finally asked Zhang Linghe the question that would remain in his mind for the rest of the day. He asked him whether he truly understood the woman standing beside him. Zhang Linghe did not answer immediately. He lowered his eyes. The question was deeper than it sounded. It was not asking whether he knew her favorite food. It was not asking whether he knew her favorite place. It was not asking whether he knew what made her laugh. The grandfather wanted to know whether Zhang Linghe understood her heart. After several seconds, Zhang Linghe quietly answered that he was still learning. That answer surprised the grandfather. But instead of becoming disappointed, he smiled. He told Zhang Linghe that this was the answer he wanted to hear. Because someone who believed they already knew everything about another person might never continue learning about them. Then the grandfather leaned forward. His voice became quieter. He told Zhang Linghe something that would later make Tion Shiwi emotional. He said that if Zhang Linghe ever chose to remain beside Tion Shiwi, he should never make her feel that she had to become someone else to deserve love. The room became completely silent. Zhang Linghe understood the seriousness of the request. He nodded, but the grandfather was not finished. He told him that Tion Shiwi did not need someone who would simply stand beside her when everyone was watching. She needed someone who would still stand beside her when nobody was watching. Those words stayed with Zhang Linghe. He did not know that he would eventually have to repeat them. He did not know that Tion Shiwi would one day hear every word. And he certainly did not know how emotional she would become when she finally discovered what her grandfather had told him. Later that evening, Tion Shiwi noticed that Zhang Linghe seemed unusually quiet. She asked him several times if something was wrong. He smiled and told her everything was fine. But she knew him well enough to recognize when something was being hidden. She looked at him carefully. She asked again. This time, Zhang Linghe did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the grandfather. The The grandfather simply lowered his eyes. That small movement immediately caught Tion Shiwi's attention. She knew something had happened. She just did not know what. She asked her grandfather whether they had been talking about her. He smiled. He told her not to worry. But that answer only made her more curious. She looked back at Zhang Linghe. His expression was serious. There was no smile on his face now. Tion Shiwei slowly realized that whatever had happened earlier was important. She asked him what her grandfather had told him. Zhang Linghe remained silent. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then he finally said that there were some things he had promised not to reveal until the right moment. Tion Shiwei looked confused. She asked what kind of promise could be so serious that he could not tell her. Zhang Linghe took a deep breath. Then he looked directly at her. He said that her grandfather had spoken about her future. Tion Shiwei immediately became emotional. She asked what he had said. Zhang Linghe hesitated. He could see that she was already worried. So he told her there was nothing she needed to fear. Her grandfather had not spoken negatively about her. In fact, he had spoken about her with enormous pride. He had talked about the little girl she once was. He had talked about how much she had changed. He had talked about her dreams. He had talked about her strength. And most importantly, he had talked about how much he wanted her to find happiness. Tion Shiwei looked down. Her eyes began to shine with tears. She tried to smile, but she could not hide how deeply the words affected her. Then Zhang Linghe revealed the part she had never expected. He told her that her grandfather had asked him to make a promise. Tion Shiwei looked up immediately. She asked what promise. Zhang Linghe paused. Then he said that her grandfather had asked him to promise that if he ever became part of Tion Shiwi's future, he would never allow her to believe that she had to face difficult moments alone. Tion Shiwei became completely silent. Her expression changed. She looked toward her grandfather. He was sitting quietly. She asked him whether it was true. He nodded. That was the moment Tion Shiwei finally broke down. Not because she was unhappy, not because she was angry, but because she suddenly understood what her grandfather had been trying to say. For years, she had thought of him as the person who gave advice, told stories, corrected her when she made mistakes, and sometimes worried too much about her decisions. But now she understood something deeper. His concern had always been about her future happiness. He had never been asking her to become perfect. He had simply wanted her to be surrounded by people who understood her value. Tion Shiwei wiped away a tear.
She tried to speak.
Nothing came out. Zhang Linghe quietly moved closer. He did not try to make the moment dramatic. He simply stood beside her. And that was exactly what her grandfather had wanted. The grandfather looked at them both. He said that life would not always be easy. There would be misunderstandings. There would be difficult decisions. There would be moments when people outside their relationship would have opinions. There would be days when they might disagree. But he said the most important thing was remembering why they had chosen each other in the first place. Tion Shiwei could barely hold herself together. She asked her grandfather why he had spoken to Zhang Linghe instead of speaking directly to her. Her grandfather smiled. He told her that sometimes a person needs to hear certain things from someone outside the family. He wanted Zhang Linghe to understand that loving someone meant accepting responsibility for the heart that trusted you. The room became quiet again. Zhang Linghe then revealed another part of the conversation. He said that her grandfather had told him something very simple. He said that Tion Shiwei could have many people around her. She could have friends. She could have colleagues. She could have supporters. She could have millions of people cheering for her. But when the noise disappeared, she would still need a small number of people she could trust completely. And he wanted Zhang Linghe to understand the importance of being one of those people. Tion Shiwei covered her face for a moment. She was crying now. Her grandfather reached for her hand. He told her not to cry. But his own expression had become emotional. He told her that tears were not something she needed to be ashamed of. He said that sometimes tears simply showed that something mattered. Tion Shiwei looked at him and smiled through her tears. Then she turned toward Zhang Linghe. She asked him whether he had agreed to the promise. Zhang Linghe looked at her. He said yes. She asked him why. He answered that he did not make the promise because he felt pressured. He made it because he wanted to. That answer left Tion Shiwei speechless. She looked at him for several seconds. Then she quietly asked what exactly he had promised. Zhang Linghe told her that he promised to respect her dreams. He promised to listen when she needed someone to listen. He promised not to disappear when life became complicated. And he promised that if she ever felt lost, he would remind her of the person she had always been. Tion Shiwei started crying again. Her grandfather watched quietly. Then Zhang Linghe added one final sentence. He said that he could not promise that every day would be perfect, but he could promise that he would never treat her happiness as something unimportant. That sentence changed everything. Tion Shiwei finally stepped forward and hugged her grandfather. She held him tightly. She cried quietly against his shoulder. For a moment, nobody said anything. It was one of those moments where words were no longer necessary. Her grandfather gently placed his hand on her back. He told her that he had one final wish. Tion Shiwei pulled away and looked at him. She asked what it was. The grandfather smiled. He told her that his final wish was not about a wedding. It was not about wealth. It was not about fame. It was not about the life that other people expected her to live. His wish was simply that she should never forget to choose happiness. Those words touched everyone in the room. Tion Shiwei looked down. Then she looked at Zhang Linghe. For the first time that evening, she smiled naturally. The grandfather told Zhang Linghe that he did not need to become a perfect person. He only needed to remain honest. He told Tion Shiwei that she did not need to find a perfect person. She simply needed someone who would respect her heart. And suddenly, the entire conversation became less about a promise and more about family. It became about trust. It became about growing older. It became about watching someone you love enter a new chapter of life and hoping they will be surrounded by people who genuinely care about them. Zhang Linghe eventually turned toward the grandfather and thanked him. The grandfather shook his head. He said there was nothing to thank him for. He simply wanted them both to understand that love was not measured by how loudly someone spoke about it. It was measured by what someone did when nobody was watching. Tion Shiwei heard those words and began crying again. She told her grandfather that she understood. She said she would remember everything. Then she looked at Zhang Linghe. She told him that she had never expected him to carry such an important conversation in silence. Zhang Linghe smiled. He told her that some promises were worth protecting until the right moment. She asked whether he had been afraid she would be upset. He admitted that he had. She laughed softly through her tears. Then she told him that she was not upset. She was grateful, because she had finally heard something she had not realized she needed to hear. Her grandfather had been thinking about her future all along. The evening eventually became quieter. The three of them remained together for a while. There was no dramatic announcement, no grand celebration, no audience, just a grandfather, a granddaughter, and someone who had been trusted with a deeply personal promise. And perhaps that was what made the moment so powerful. Sometimes the biggest moments in life do not happen in front of thousands of people. Sometimes they happen in a quiet room. Sometimes the most important words are spoken softly. Sometimes a simple promise can carry more meaning than 1,000 public declarations. For Tion Shiwei, the conversation changed the way she looked at her grandfather. For Zhang Linghe, it changed the meaning of the responsibility he had accepted. And for the grandfather, it was simply a way of saying that the person he loved most deserved a future filled with understanding, respect, and happiness. As the evening came to an end, Tion Shiwei stood beside her grandfather. She looked at him and promised that she would never forget his words. Then she turned toward Zhang Linghe. She smiled. This time, there were no tears, only gratitude. And in that quiet moment, Zhang Linghe understood exactly why the grandfather had trusted him with the conversation. It was never really about controlling Tion Shiwei's future. It was about giving her the freedom to choose it. It was never really about demanding a promise. It was about asking whether the people around her would protect the person she truly was. And it was never really about one emotional conversation. It was about everything that had happened before it, and everything that could happen after it. That night, Tion Shiwei went to sleep with tears still visible in her eyes. But they were no longer tears of confusion. They were tears of gratitude. She finally understood that her grandfather had been quietly thinking about her happiness for years. And Zhang Linghe finally understood that the promise he had made was bigger than a single conversation.
It was a promise to respect.
A promise to listen. A promise to remain present. And most importantly, a promise to never forget that behind the public image, behind the success, behind the attention, there was simply a woman who wanted to be understood. And perhaps that was the most emotional part of the entire story. Her grandfather never asked Zhang Linghe to promise that Tion Shiwei would never experience difficult days. He never asked him to promise that life would always be perfect. He never asked him to promise that there would never be disagreements. He simply asked him to promise that when difficult days came, Tion Shiwei would not have to question whether she mattered. And that was the promise Zhang Linghe said he was willing to make. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful expression of love is not a dramatic declaration. It is consistency. It is patience. It is listening. It is staying. And sometimes, it is simply looking at someone and letting them know that they do not have to face everything alone. So, what do you think about the grandfather decision in this fictional story? Do you think Zhang Linghe made the right choice by keeping the promise until the right moment? And if you were Tion Shiwei, how would you react after discovering what your grandfather had privately told someone you trusted? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this emotional story, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the next story, because the next chapter may reveal another secret that nobody expected.